In this part, we will look at the twofold nature of the soul, of the human soul particularly. May we not say that the soul is the whole self-movement of the whole of life on this planet Earth and of the universe? Don't fall off your chair just because you hold empirical knowledge as objective. Doesn't mean it is so. It just means that perhaps you've forgotten the basics. Is the whole possession of the totality of our own psychology and our self-knowledge, not of us as living beings, living lives, life moving through time? Is this not the soul that moves? Do we not, as living beings, possess life, our self-knowledge? And is life not, perhaps, living knowledge? We recommend that you have another look at our 3 last videos, number 7, 8, and 9 of our Wordiverse. Have another look at those and see if it fits with what I say. How is our cognitive abilities interconnected with the soul? Such a thing is not very obvious today, is it? Because everything that we have in our sciences has to do with the mighty upstairs and its minute neurons and the small topologies and n-dimensional geometries, which with their fast-moving little tiny clocks. Everything has to do with that computation. That this complicated structure is governed by the most simple of things is now not very apparent in our science today. But how can such a thing work? We are so centered in our senses today. Sensations. There are some fathers of psychology, such as, for example, William James, who marveled at his being absorbed in an ocean of sensation. There is the famed Ernst Mach, who helped Einstein figure out that all masses in the universe all play a role in gravitation. To him too, the beautiful sensational aspects of himself was the ocean with which he swam. Is this the beginning and end of things? This biophysiological body that I am? But didn't we say that human beings are complex unities? What about the soul? What about consciousness? What about intellect, the mind? They all come together and it's all formed by the intermedia of the divine middle, the soul. The soul has twofold aspects in our world. An irrational aspect, or we will use the modern term automata. I think if you look at Wikipedia, you will find that the idea of unconscious automata of nature. In antiquity, this is known as the irrational soul, void of forethought. Because Mother Nature doesn't have to put any thinking into germinating seeds of plants, animals, and also generating our own bodies and the mighty DNA structures that governs it. From seeds, automata. What else is there that's so automatic in us? Perception. Sensible perception. My eye seeing objects, my ear hearing things. We don't think with our ears or think with our eyes. There is a place where it all comes together, is interpreted from the senses, integrated. Now that part is very interesting, and it is passive. Passive meaning it's automatic. The objects of sense, if I see a white pen or a black shoe, I immediately form an image, an impression of it in my mind. These impressions are being formed very early in life, from right after birth. And this is a very interesting circumstance to me because there is a psychologist called John Piaget who describes in the first 2 years of life the sensory motor phase of development in little babies. And that object permanency is established in the first 2 years. Right from birth, the famed peekaboo game for babies. But you might find it also interesting that since the earliest of time, this forming fantasy, which is very, very interesting, it's passive, always present with our perception. The essence of the interpretations of impressions that comes through our senses, that through which we integrate our world and in which our world exists for ourselves. I exist for my world and my world exists for me. We'll come back to this fantasy in our later videos. What's the other aspect of the human soul? The thinking, contemplating, rational. We've indicated in our wordiverse that there might be problems with the rational idea in itself. Well, the reason is that the fantasy, which we are only touching on the surface, another word for the fantasy is imagination. That will perhaps make it a little more easier. But the ability to form hypotheses, for example, propositions, our scientific abilities pertain to the intellectual side of us that needs direction. It needs practice. And practice in antiquity, for example, was around the practice of mathematics and the high subjects, geometry, as a discipline, as a thinking discipline. And this is the one thing that I think we miss today very much in our intellectual lives, in our minds, is structure. An unstructured mind is an unproductive mind. And we need to find ways, there are many ways, I'm not going to go into that, approaches that you could structure your thoughts in a disciplined way, your mind in a disciplined way, and make a disciplined effort every day to learn. Learning is one beautiful thing. Requires direction, requires control. So the two aspects we have is the rational aspect and the aspect of automata. Well, what's the automata about? We've already mentioned the fantasy or the imagination. What about the other passions? Desire. Desire for money, power, control. These are passions. Fanaticism is a passion. The blind following of emotions is a passion. This requires no thought or analysis or anything like that. What about anger? Anger is, the mythological image for anger is a raging lion. What about guilt? Big one. These are things that must come under our control, under the control of the soul, the intellect. Because the soul is very many things to very many beings and many living things. In fact, all life is the soul. All knowledge, our knowledge particularly, our knowledge of ourselves, is of the nature of the soul. Our mind is of the nature of the soul. Be safe, be loving to yourself, and practice forgiveness.